Hey friends, Miss Susan here. Today we're talking about story elements. Now, there are lots of story elements, things that make up a story, but we're going to talk about five basic ones, and those are characters, setting, plot, conflict, and theme. So don't worry, we're going to talk about all of it, and I bet you know more than you think you know. This is going to be easier than you think, okay? I promise. Today we're going to be reading George Brown, Class Clown, Trouble Magnet by Nancy Krulik, and it's illustrated by Aaron Blecha. Now, great illustrations in this book, a little bit of explosions going on. George Brown, he's just feeling out of sorts. Have you ever had a time when you kind of just were unsure why things were happening? You're like, what's going on? I just don't get it. I don't understand it. Or have you ever been embarrassed? Maybe you had a little indigestion after you ate lunch in the cafeteria and you burped and you were a little embarrassed. Said excuse me, of course, but still it's a little funny feeling. So we're gonna read this story. A couple of those things happened to George Brown, Class Clown. He is just getting in all kinds of trouble in this story. And as we go, we want to talk about those five story elements. Okay. Now, right off the bat, I know a character in the story, George Brown, right? Characters are the people or the animals in a story, could be an animal. And so the characters make the story happen. So I know right off the bat, George Brown is a character. Now, where might the setting be? The setting is where it's happening and when it's happening. Where do you think George Brown Class Clown probably happens? Thinking in a classroom, right? Class clown, classroom, maybe. He could be online, an online classroom, and kind of being silly in his online classroom. That's possible. So we'll find out what the setting is, when and where it takes place. And of course, after we finish the entire book, we'll know the plot. The plot is everything that happens in the story, the beginning, the middle, and the end, right? Everything, all the events that happen in the story. The conflict in the story is the problem. You've had a problem before, right? Maybe your pencil broke and you had to go sharpen it. That was the problem and solution, right? The problem might be that you were really hungry and you forgot your lunch. That would definitely be a problem to me, right? What could the solution be for that? How could you get lunch? You could share with a friend. You could call a grown up that's at your house. Maybe they could bring it to you. Mhm. Maybe you find $20 in your pocket and you go to the local restaurant and order a fancy lunch, huh? So lots of different problems and solutions that could happen in a book. I think the problem here, though, is that George Brown is a trouble magnet, but we'll see more in detail when we get into the book what the problem is. And theme is the other story element I want to talk to you about today. Theme is kind of the overall message of the story. What does the author want to tell you? What's the big idea? Okay. Kind of like, let's say, in Cinderella. You know the story Cinderella? The stepmother and the stepsisters are mean to her, and she has to clean the house and do all the laundry. And then she gets to go to the ball because the fairy godmother comes and helps her out with her beautiful dress and turning the pumpkin into a carriage. And then, of course, they fall in love and all the mushy gushy stuff. So the theme in Cinderella might be kind. Those stepsisters were really mean to Cinderella. Maybe the theme or the big idea that the author wanted us to understand was to be kind. Or it could be do your chores every day so they don't get backed up and you have to do them all in one day. Maybe that could be a theme. Be responsible, love everyone. That might be a good theme for Cinderella. And it depends on who you are and how you see the world as to what you think the theme might be, right? This could be kind of an opinion question. You might think it's one theme and someone else might understand another theme from the story, and that's okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We'll talk about these things as we read chapters 1 and 2 today. Okay. Trouble magnet. If you'd like to take an AR test on this, if you or your school participates in that, it is an AR book. It's 3.5, and this is the quiz number 140471, and it is worth 1 whole point. So when we get done reading all these chapters, you can go take the quiz. If you have the book with you, go ahead and use it for the quiz if your teacher allows you to. I think it's a good idea to look back through the book. That's what good readers do to prove their answers. Trouble magnet. Oh, this looks interesting. What is she doing? You know what else good readers do? They look at the pictures before they start and they say, well, what do I think might be happening? These guys look a little scared, don't they? Look at their facial expressions. And she is like, she must be dancing or something. Let's find out what they're doing in the story. Chapter 1. Okay, this is just wrong, George Brown whispered to his friend Alex. They were in the school gym watching their fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Kelly, do a hula dance. Seriously wrong, Alex agreed. Teachers shouldn't hula dance. Now, do you know why those words are darker than the other words? The author wants them to stand out. Yeah, the author wants you to pay close attention to that. So if you see words that are in bold, that means they are darker than the rest of the words. They want you to pay close attention. Teachers shouldn't hula dance. Mrs. Kelly gave the class a big, gummy smile. Looks like she's missing a tooth so you can see all of her gums. A little piece of green food was caught between her teeth. This move is called Ami Anayu, Mrs. Kelly said, swaying back and forth in a figure 8. You can see the radio down there playing the music. It's embarrassing when your teacher is dancing in the middle of the gym floor with a grass skirt over her pants and a paper flower necklace around her neck. But George didn't even crack a smile. He knew better. Mrs. Kelly took her dancing really seriously. It shouldn't be nice to laugh. It wouldn't. Oh, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Let me back up because that's what good readers do. That didn't make any sense. And I'm gonna back up and reread that sentence because it didn't quite sound right. Let me go back. But George didn't even crack a smile. He knew better. Mrs. Kelly took her dancing really seriously. It wouldn't be nice to laugh. And George was really trying really hard to be nice, well-behaved fourth grader. His days of being the class clown were over. So he's thinking in his head, I'm not going to be the class clown anymore, right? All right. Hula dance tells a story, Mrs. Kelly told the class. She straightened her crooked black glasses. Dance I'm doing now is about catching a fish in the ocean. Mrs. Kelly moved her arms up and down like waves in the ocean. Can you do that? Waves like waves in the ocean. You feel like a wave? The skin on the back of her arms wiggled and jiggled as she waved. The wiggly, jiggly skin kept on waving even after Mrs. Kelly stopped moving. George knew he shouldn't stare, but he couldn't help himself. It was too gross to ignore. Oh, we're going to a hukilau, Mrs. Kelly began to sing in a high-pitched voice. She wiggled her hips and jiggled her arms. Hooky, hooky, low. The kids all stared at their teacher. This was pretty hard to believe. Okay, class, Mrs. Kelly called out. Now comes the fun part. Make up your own hula dances. Use your bodies to tell stories. Nobody moved. Why do you think nobody moved? Maybe they didn't want to do a dance. Maybe they were a little embarrassed to do a dance or create a dance in front of everyone. I know I might be. Look at their faces. So far, who are our characters? We have George. We have Mrs. Kelly. She's a character in a story, right? She's a person in the story. And then, of course, we have other students, right? We don't know their names yet, but we know that there are other students in the story. on, it's fun, Mrs. Kelly said. Hooky, 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 low. One by one, the kids began to move around. They weren't hula dances, but they were dances that told stories, sort of. Sage began stretching her arms out like tree branches. I'm a tree reaching up toward the sun. Can you try that? Be a tree. Oh, it feels good. So we know Sage is a character. That's a name of one of the people in the story. Sage is a character. George rolled his eyes. Now, why did the author put that in bold letters? Because they wanted it to stand out to us. They want us to know and remember that George rolled his eyes. And what do you do when you roll your eyes? You go, like they go up to the top of your head, like you're looking up. It's not a very respectful thing to do, right? You don't want to do that. But usually you do that when when you're frustrated with something, or you're just kind of over it. So let's see what's going on with George. George rolled his eyes. That was really cheesy. But of course, he didn't say that. Teachers hated when you made fun of other kids. Yeah, you don't want to do that. It's if you want to be nice, be kind. Louis, who thought he was the coolest kid in the fourth grade, rocked out on air guitar. Now, Louis is another character, and do you guys know what air guitar is? Can you play air guitar? Okay, I'm not very good with air guitar, but it's an imaginary guitar. All right, as he played, he made twanging noises. Twang-a-lang-a-lang-a-lang. Rock on, Louis, his friend Mike cheered. Nope, there's another character, Mike. Twang, twang, Louis sang even louder. Juliana swung an imaginary bat at an imaginary ball. These are some interesting hooky dances they're coming up with, some hula dances, crazy hooky loud dances they're coming up with. And it's out of here, she shouted. George hunched over and began swinging his arms. He was an ape looking for a banana. But before he really got started dancing, George felt something funny in his stomach. It was like there were hundreds of tiny bubbles bouncing around inside him. Then strange gurgling noises started coming up from the bottom of his belly. There was a big burp inside him, and it really wanted to come out, but there was no way George was going to let it. Not here, not now, because his burps were magic and caused trouble with a capital T. Now, why do they say trouble with a capital T? What do you think? Maybe. Good ideas. Trouble with a capital T tells me that maybe it's really important, because don't you capitalize important words? Yeah. This burp was strong. George could already feel it bing-bonging its way out of his belly and ping-ponging its way into his chest. He had to stop it. George dropped down to the floor on his belly. He started wriggling up and down like a giant slithering snake. Can you do that? Be a snake. Be a snake. George didn't care what he looked like. He would do anything to bump that burp back down. He pinched his nose and clamped his mouth shut. Stay down, Burp, George ordered. I mean it. Stay down. What, George? Look at you, Mrs. Kelly said. What kind of story are you trying to tell us? George gulped. There was definitely a story behind the dance he was doing. It just wasn't one he could tell his teacher. No way. The super burps were George's secret, and he was going to keep it that way. Now, George's secret is in bold. The letters are bold. So that tells me that's something pretty important. So apparently George wants to keep this burp thing a secret. He doesn't want anybody to know about that. All right, chapter 2. Let's take a look at this picture. What is going on here? It looks like maybe he or she is screaming. We've got a skateboard rider, and it looks like a magician, and a guy with straws. What? I hope you don't do that. That's oh no, don't ever do that. One, you'll hurt yourself. And two, it's just kind of gross. All right, chapter 2 of Trouble Magnet. It had all started on George's first day at Edith B. Sugarman Elementary School. George's dad was in the Army, and his family moved around a lot. Does anybody here move around a lot? Maybe because your parents' job or what, any kind of, we move around for lots of different reasons. So kind of put yourself in his shoes and think about how George might feel being new at a new school. So here they were living in Beaver Brook, and once again, George was at a new school. By now, George knew that when you're the new kid, you expect the first day to be rotten, but this first day was the rottenest. Rottenest. You put est on the end of a word, means it's the most, the worst, the baddest. George had promised himself to turn over a new leaf. No more pranks. No more class clown. He wasn't going to get into any trouble anymore, like he had at all his old schools. And at first, it had really worked. He raised his hand before answering questions. He didn't make faces behind the teachers' backs. And when Mrs. Kelly made him be her square dancing partner, George hadn't made a joke. Not even when his teacher put on a straw hat and started yodeling. Do you know what yodeling is? You go, yodelay, hoo hoo. By the end of that first day, George had the exact same number of friends he'd had at the beginning of the day. 0. Being the new, well-behaved George was no fun. You guys, I hope you'll keep this in mind when you see a new kid at your school, or maybe a new student at your church or your playgroup. Maybe you can go up to them and play with them and say, "Hi, my name is so and so. Would you like to be friends?" That would be nice and would help them feel more comfortable. That night, George's parents took him out to Ernie's Ice Cream Emporium. While they were sitting outside and George was finishing his root beer float, a shooting star flashed across the sky. So George made a wish. I want to make kids laugh, but not get into trouble. The trouble was the star was gone before George could finish the wish, so only half came true, the first half. Why these words are a little bit slanted right there. Do you see that? Let's zoom in and take a look at that. Those words are kind of slanted to the side, right? You see how they're not straight up and down like these words? That's called italics. And when you're reading a book and something is in italics, that means it's special. The author wants you to pay attention to it, kind of like bold text. So in this case, it means that George is thinking something. He didn't say it out loud because what does it need if he's saying it out loud? If it's something that's being said out loud, it has to have quotation marks, right, on each side of what they're saying. So if we had 2 little marks here and 2 little marks here, then we would know, okay, George is saying that out loud. But there are no quotation marks. It's just italics. So George is thinking those words. So he says, I want to make kids laugh, but I don't want to get in trouble. Problem was he didn't get it out in time before the star went by. A minute later, George had a funny feeling in his belly. It was like there were hundreds of tiny bubbles bouncing around in there. The bubbles bounced up and down and all around. They ping-ponged their way into his chest and bing-bonged their way up into his throat. And then burp. Oh my goodness. Has that ever happened to you? You're trying to hold the burp in and it just gets out. George let out a big burp, a huge big burp, a super burp. The super burp was loud and it was magical. Magical? Suddenly, George lost control of his arms and legs. It was like they had minds of their own. His hands grabbed straws and stuck them up his nose like a walrus. Oh my goodness. His feet jumped up on the table and started dancing the hokey pokey. Everyone at Ernie's started laughing except his parents. Now, every time the burp came, trouble followed. Plenty of trouble. And remember, that's kind of the idea of this book, that George is getting in a lot of trouble, isn't he? So that's probably why the author put those words in darker letters, made them bold. George never knew when a burp would strike or what it would make him do. Like juggle raw eggs in his classroom or skateboard right into a bucket of paper mache goo in the art room. Every time the burp came, George made the other kids laugh, but he also managed to make grown-ups really mad. Take a look at the picture. You can tell a lot from a picture. Good readers read the picture too. Even if there aren't any words, you can still read pictures. Look, so this child is laughing. She looks amused. This guy's laughing. He is trying to hold it in, right? But he just, it popped out. His teacher's not very happy though, is she? That was why, at the moment, George was on the floor, wriggling his body up and down like a snake. Oh, that's not his teacher. Is that his teacher in the hula skirt? Yeah, in the hula flower necklace. He's wiggling like a snake. Hmm, that burp made him do that. All right. It was why he was holding his breath and almost turning blue. George wasn't trying to make fun of hula dancing. He was just trying to keep the super burp down. Whoosh! Suddenly, George felt a huge bubble pop inside his stomach. All the air rushed right out of him. The fizzy feeling was gone. All right, George had beaten the burp. He leaped to his feet and pumped his fist in the air. George, Mrs. Kelly asked again, tell us what your dance is about. Uh-oh. How was he going to explain this one? Well, um, I'm a snake, George told her, and I'm excited because I just swallowed a rat whole. Oh, gross, Sage said. So you see these quotation marks right here, the little teeny tiny marks. These are what we were just talking about a minute ago. Because Sage said it, the person in the story said it, they have to put these little marks around the side of it. And that tells you, hey, this person is saying out loud. This character is saying that out loud. Okay. Snakes do eat rats, George told her. We learned that at my old school. He's right, they do. Mrs. Kelly flashed George one of her huge gummy smiles. Is it a gummy smile because she's eating gummy worms? No, 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 no. It just means because she's like missing a tooth right there. So you can see her gums, the pink part of your mouth. You're right, she said. Some snakes do eat rats. That was a very original hula dance, George. George was glad his teacher had liked his dance, but he hoped he'd never have to do that or any other belch squelching dances again. He hoped the super burp was gone for good, but somehow he doubted it. Hmm. All right. Well, that's the end of chapter 2. Let's do a little pre-reading here. Chapter 3, they've got signs up on the wall. 5 a day, vegetables, meatloaf. Where do you think they are? Meatloaf, 5 a day. They've got bag lunches. You know where they are? So let's talk about the characters for a minute in George Brown Class Clown. We've got George. Who else? The teacher, other students. Right. Yeah. So far that's who we have. Oh, their mom and dad too, right? George's mom and dad went to the ice cream emporium with them. So those are our characters. The setting, where were they? The setting is where they were. That is, they were at school, right? And the ice cream emporium, because he went to get ice cream one night, didn't he? Didn't he after school? So the setting is when and where it took place. When did this take place? Well, we don't really know, do we? And sometimes we don't know. Sometimes that just happens. So it might be just during the day. We could say during the day. We don't have a specific date and time that it happened, but we know it happened at school and in the cafeteria and in the classroom, right? So let's say, what was the plot of the first two chapters? What happened? In the beginning, what happened? We found out he was a new student, right? And he didn't make any new friends in school that day. And then what happened? The burp came, right? That was a big thing. The burp came up and he was trying to suppress it or keep it down. Okay. And what happened in the end of chapter 2? Was he successful? Yeah, he was able to hold it down. It kind of made him do funny things, right? But he did get the burp. He got the burp to stay down. He had a little burp that came out and made him funny, but that second big burp he held down. So he was kind of successful. So, what was the conflict in our story? Conflict, remember, is a problem, something that you don't want to happen or something that needs to be fixed. The problem was the burp, right? Because he knew that burp was going to make him do something silly or do something strange. So that burp came. And what was the solution? He tried to keep it down, right? And he held his breath. Oh, and he did his best to keep it down. A little bit got out on that one page, but for the most part, he kept the biggest part of it down. Yep, a little bit of it came out on that page. Burp. So he let out a big burp, a huge burp, a super burp. The super burp was loud and it was magical. And that tells us what happens when he has a burp, right? But he had more. He had more bubbles in his belly and he had to hold them in, didn't he? He squiggled around like a worm because of that burp, but he held the rest of the burp in. And so that we could call our solution. So, what could you say the theme of those two chapters is? The theme, what's the big idea, the one thing the author wants us to take away? What do you think? Maybe if you work hard at something, then you can achieve it because he worked hard to hold that burp down, right? Or maybe be nice to others or be friends with the new kids in school because it was all about how he was a new kid, right? And he had a problem. So maybe if he had had some friends to talk to about it, maybe that would have helped him. We never know. Well, we will get together again and read chapters 3 and 4. I hope you liked that. If so, go ahead and like and share this video if you want to. And I hope you'll join me later for chapters 3 and 4. Take care of you.